Hey guys, Shaman
And Alina.
here from Harper Therapy, and I'm a dude that hangs around, and she's one of our awesome therapists here.
Yep.
And we've got a whole group of neat therapists here that do some great work.
We do. A group of really diverse and really in tune therapists, I would say.
Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit last week about grief.
Right.
We kind of introduced the idea and the concept.
Right.
And we're doing a little bit of a series on it.
Right. So we're back to talk more about grief.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
Right. Particularly how it affects men.
Yes.
Like, I think women can be a little more in tune with their grief. Maybe a little more emotionally intelligent.
Yeah, I think we tend to go within for better or worse. We tend to internalize things,
Right. And guys tend to like externalize things.
Right.
Or they just completely shut down.
Right.
Which is still kind of like externalizing
Either
things.
let me fix it or I'm just going to like escape into whatever it is.
But we were talking through something just a minute ago that was really kind of interesting. The idea that, there's these acceptable patterns that men have, like kind of wrapped around grief, like anger.
Yeah.
Like it's okay for guys to be angry about grief, right? Or express their anger and grief. And society accepts that more than like it accepts a guy going through a grieving process.
Right, or being vulnerable.
Right.
Looks weak, quote unquote.
Right, and then we were also talking about how like, a lot of those external symptoms for guys are like frustration, we said anger. Irritability, right.
Just like being short with people.
Right, and then like in your blog entry for this week, you talk a little bit about things being unfair.
Right.
Like, and kind of the interesting tie you made a minute ago, we kind of talked through this before we do this, was that, those are all like external things.
Right. Focusing on like, okay, I got to this point, or I provide this for my family, or I've done all of this, and I feel like I'm not, like, where's the fulfillment from it? It doesn't seem fair.
Right. And then, and even like when it comes to like the anger and all that stuff, like it's okay.
Yeah.
That's external.
Yeah.
Like we as a society look at that and we're like, oh yeah, that guy's really angry. And
right. And it's interesting because part of the reason this topic came up, even for you all to hear about, is that I see a lot of clients and couples, right? So there are in couples, a lot of what I see, heterosexual couples with men, they tend to express their feelings through anger.
Right.
Like,
and it's very external.
It's external.
Right.
And it's like getting short with the kids or snapping at the kids, kind of losing your cool. Picking at each other, like with your wife.
Right.
Going off on someone at work for something they said, or just even having road rage, right? Like, like having it on the road, right? Just kind of taking it out on other drivers, or even like a server or someone at Starbucks, right? So it can all come out in those ways, like where it's like you're like, I'm not an angry person, but then here you are, the behavior is, it's like, well, who is this? Because it's not who you want to be, but it's what's happening. Right.
You kind of, as you're talking, I just brought something up in like my memory, like when my father passed away, I think anger was like my number one response.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to the point like where, like when someone passes away and there's like, there's, families, there's always drama and all kinds of things. And I just remember like, as different family was having different opinions on where you bury someone and all those things.
Yeah.
Like, and it was a lot like on my mom and the family and my brothers and everybody. And I was like, I'll take it on. I'll just fight everybody. I don't even care. Like that was my response.
Gotcha.
Like literally, I remember telling them, I'll fight everybody.
It's kind of your way to like
how I can deal with this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's
so
a great
point. I mean, as you were talking about anger and frustration and all that, just really brought that up for me. Like, and at the time, I didn't even think about it. Like it was just
just your natural.
The natural anger was where I went, and it was so appropriate for me.
Right.
but I don't, like, looking back on it now a couple years later, I don't think it was necessarily appropriate.
Right.
But at the time it felt
like the way to
righteous
do it.
Or something, right?
Yeah.
Like this is how I was going to deal with it.
Yeah,
right.
I'm gonna, take my stand.
I think that goes to what we said last week. Mm-hmm. And Christian kind of touched on it when he was doing the video with us for last week's video, about, like, guys, if they call in, they talk about everything but anger.
Right.
Right?
No, grief.
Grief.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
They'll talk about their anger, they'll talk about their frustration,
Right.
they'll talk about how their relationship's falling apart.
Right.
Talk about all these things.
Yeah.
And the core of what you end up working with them, whether it's a couple or a guy or whatever, could be grief.
100%. And a lot of the times, I think most people come to therapy and they're like, oh God, you're going to make me talk about my past and all this stuff. And, it's like, yes, we are. But not because I'm here to, like, we're going to be woe is me and wallow in all of it. But the truth is, I think so many of us have these things that have happened where we have not acknowledged the loss in what happened and the grief. Like, it could be loss of your childhood.
Sure.
Like, so many people experience trauma or neglect, and you have to grow up really fast, and you never get a chance to grieve your childhood. And sometimes even having your own children, you see what you're able to provide for them, and it whether you know it or not, triggers what you didn't get as a kid. Right. Or, you lose a grandparent or a loved one earlier in life and you never fully process that. It could be, there's so many different ways that grief can manifest, and yet the symptoms could be just irritability or anger or short-tempered or the feeling of it's not fair.
Right. Unfair. Like, that's the big one. Like, and all of those are external, like you mentioned in the beginning. All of those things are external except grief. Right. Like the actual umbrella emotion of grief, that overriding emotion of grief that's driving all of that, that's the internal thing. Right. And all the rest of it for guys, I think it fits in for guys because they're kind of lashing out in anger and frustration and irritability. Right. Because it's a do thing. Right. Like, I'm physically doing something. I'm angry with someone, I'm yelling at someone, or I'm telling them to go piss off or whatever it's tangible. Right. It's tangible. I can do that. Whereas just sitting with that grief. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Right? Like.
Yeah, and I think that's really where therapy is powerful, is that we hold space for that, and you don't have to do it alone. Right. And next week we're going to get into kind of going on that inner journey, the fear of, like, what's going to open up, right? So we're going to talk more about that next week, that internal process. But I think it's just it's being willing to go inwards, because really what happens when you're willing to go inwards, it's like the outer stuff somehow magically works itself out. Right. When you're willing to face what's inside.
Even the really important outer stuff, like your relationships.
Job, your relationships with your kid, even like your hobbies and passions and pursuing those.
Right. All those things start to kind of come together. Yes. Because you're, like, dealing with the internal thing. Yeah. And I mean, I'll be honest, guys are not taught how to grieve. No. It's just, I think I said this last week.
Most emotions.
Well, right. Guys struggle with emotions anyway. But, particularly, I look back on grief, like, through my life and as a child, and probably even what I've modeled to my children. We don't teach guys how to grieve. Like, and I really struggle with that when my father passed away. Like, how do you even manage this? How do you even... And I still struggle with it.
Right.
Like,
it's a huge gaping hole.
It's a big gaping hole. It's a vacuum in your life, particularly when it's someone you love and care for. But guys just are not taught how to deal with it. Right. I can even remember, like, your dad's upset, grieving over this thing, close the door so the kids don't see him cry. Right. And I remember Yolanda doing that one time when my grandfather had passed away, closing the door so the kids didn't see me crying and being upset. Right. So it's just so ingrained in our society that's a hard paradigm to change. And it's not doing any help to guys.
Right. I agree completely. And I think, there's a call for action with men to become more vulnerable, to become more emotionally intelligent. And yet there's not always safe spaces to do so. Right. There's this kind of paradox of wanting men to be more woke and to, like, have that emotional intelligence, which, by the way, you're totally capable of, just letting you know.
Me?
Yeah. Not you, but just men in general.
Not you.
Yeah, not you, Sean. Just men in general. But I think there's also this like fear of vulnerability and being judged for it. So, one of our icons here is Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about that. This expectation of men to be vulnerable, and yet also like not the allowance of them to do so. Right. So, yeah.
All right, guys.
I guess that's it.
Did you have anything else? I'm sorry.
No. I was thinking. Well, I guess that is it.
I thought we covered everything.
Yeah.
Right?
So we'll be back. We'll be back next week.
All right, guys. Have a good one.